Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the Sojourn. Welcome to the Sojourn. This is the W.E.B. Du Bois Major Works Seminar Series at Clark Atlanta University, and my name is Dr. Stephanie Evans. And it has been my pleasure and honor to lead a seminar of 50 of my colleagues from around Atlanta. And in his last of several autobiographies, he wrote, "Autobiographies do not form indisputable authorities. They are always incomplete and often unreliable. Eager as I am to put down the truth, there are difficulties. Memory fails, especially in small details, so that it becomes finally but a theory of my life, with much forgotten and misconceived, with valuable testimony, but often less than absolutely true, despite my intention to be frank and fair." So today we're looking at Dr. Du Bois's autobiographies to find out what theories he has derived, or explanations he has derived from his life, and to value his testimony. Recently at the University of Pennsylvania, there was a ceremony honoring Dr. Du Bois and recognizing his contribution as an assistant instructor doing the Philadelphia Negro study. Professor Zuberry, a sociologist, invited some top Du Boisian scholars from around the country. And at that time, I admitted freely, I don't know who Dr. Du Bois is. But this year has been, we're mid-year, it is a fabulous opportunity to learn. What I said at that conference was that Dr. Du Bois was a conductor. When looking at his life, it made sense to me that he was a conductor in three ways. First, in the physics sense, the sense of energy. In his life, he was an energetic force that enabled the passing of ideas, and he electrified many with his productivity and his verve for life. He played tennis, he loved to dance, he was very serious about his business, but he was full of life and energy. So a conductor in the physics sense. Also a conductor as a symphony conductor, as in conducting an orchestra. In his school and work, particularly here at Atlanta University, Clark Atlanta University, he orchestrated the Atlanta University conferences every year for 2 decades, and they were going on before and after him. But the way that he brought together this group of researchers to not only produce in the conference form, but the Atlanta University publications, and then returning to Atlanta, coming back to the Phylon and orchestrating the leading intellectuals from all across the country to come and discuss the Negro problem. So I saw Du Bois as a conductor as a conductor of a symphony in school, and finally in his work, he was a conductor as in an engineer, a social engineer, a conductor like on a train. He moved social policy forward. So he was a social engineer conductor as well. And so there are obviously many aspects to Du Bois's life and work. I like Reland Rabaka from University of Colorado. He calls Du Bois a transdisciplinary critical social theorist. A transdisciplinary critical social theorist. And I think that, for me, encompasses the complexity of what Du Bois was as a person, but as a scholar as well. Du Bois was trans-everything. He was transdisciplinary, he was transnational, pan-African, trans-pan-Africanist. He was always crossing borders. And that is revealed in the biographies of Du Bois. Just looking at kind of a general sense of who's written about him and how they have written about him and what they've highlighted, you see that it's like a kaleidoscope, many angles. Everyone is looking at Du Bois from a different aspect. For example, in the humanities, Arnold Rampersad wrote about the art and imagination of W.E.B. Du Bois, and really kind of captured the beauty of the spirit of Dr. Du Bois in the humanities sense. In history, David Levering Lewis and Gerald Horne have written the chronological account of Du Bois's life, and David Levering Lewis, of course, writing every single detail about every single aspect in the 2 volumes of Du Bois's life, whereas Gerald Horne ended up writing not only a biography, but there's an encyclopedia of Du Bois to really take his ideas, in the encyclopedic and historical sense. In education, Derek Aldridge wrote on Du Bois's educational philosophies and really contextualized Du Bois in a way that was very helpful, looking at the progressive era and the uplift, and placing Du Bois in the center of many different types of intellectuals in the progressive era, like Alexander Crummell, Anna Julia Cooper, and Kelly Miller from Howard University. So Aldridge is looking at the educational philosophies of Du Bois. In sociology, Rieland Rabaka, as I mentioned, Against Epistemic Apartheid, Intellectual History of Sociological Ideas. Rabaka is arguing against epistemic apartheid, right? Epistemology, the source of knowledge, and arguing that in sociology, no one recognizes Du Bois, right? So arguing against epistemic apartheid and re-immersing Dr. Du Bois in sociology. Similarly, I'm really looking forward to Alden Morris's work, who is resituating Du Bois not only as the founder of sociology, but arguing that it happened here at Atlanta University, that Du Bois honed his skills at Fisk and Harvard. Then he went to University of Pennsylvania, where he crafted the art of sociology. But it was here at Clark Atlanta University that he not only perfected that with the Atlanta publications, but he trained all of the other people who then went out to, build the Chicago School and things like that. So these are the ways that people who are writing about Du Bois's life are viewing Du Bois in this amazingly complex, transdisciplinary way, as Rabaka said. And so there are many different ways to view Du Bois's life. Just a review of his life, school, and work. He was born in 1868 and passed in 1963. He married Nina Gomer in the 1890s, and I won't go into my comments about the 3 autobiographies at this time. I'll wait until after the panelists have presented. But the way that he talks about marriage, and the way that he talks about their first Christmas together, when he was going to, he was going to surprise her with this umbrella, and he had to wait until she went to sleep, and he's creeping across the floor to, as soon as she's asleep, so he can put it in her stocking. I mean, it's really amazing to read the humanity of this person, this scholar that we know as Du Bois. So he was a married man, and he, as I said earlier, had a verve for life. He had a son in 1899 that lived to be only a year and a half, right, on the passing of the firstborn, which he writes about in The Souls of Black Folk. Then he has a daughter, Yolande Du Bois, born in 1900. And then after Nina dies, marries Shirley Graham in the later years of his life. So he was in his life a husband and a father, as well as a scholar. And choosing to be buried in Ghana, and eventually rejecting this concept of nigger-hating America at the end of his life. That was part of who he was. In school, he attended Great Barrington High School and graduated at 16, and attended Fisk, attended Harvard, University of Berlin, and ended up with a PhD, earning a PhD from Harvard with the dissertation, The Suppression of the African Slave Trade, which was the first in a series published by Harvard University Press. And in work, he in the rural parts of Tennessee. And what's striking is that he identifies himself as a teacher. We think of Du Bois as a scholar, but he writes so much about how he cared for his students. He cared for youth. He cared for what was happening to children in this country as a teacher for almost 2 decades before being a university professor. So in his work as a university professor, he was at Wilberforce, here at Atlanta University twice, but intermittently at NAACP and working internationally in the Pan-Africanist movement. So his life, school, and work were very interconnected. And as a scholar, he was bar none, but he was a full human being, and that's what we're looking forward to exploring today. V.P. Franklin wrote that Du Bois was eschewing the position of the detached scholar in many of his works. Du Bois offered his personal feelings, emotions, and responses to the topics under discussion. And so what I appreciate about Du Bois is that he was both objective and subjective. He was a world-class scholar, but he clearly understood that there's no such thing as purely objective scholarship. Who you are as a person, who he was as a New Englander, as a black man who came down to the South and was shocked as hell at this thing called racism and these things called lynching, that influenced who he was as a scholar. And he understood that there was no such thing as truth with a capital T and objective truth, that we all have an understanding of truth based on our identities, and that in particular, black identity had something very important to say to the world about ideas and about circumstances. Du Bois also understood that autobiography was inherently flawed, and of course we have anthropology, we have humanities, we have professors who are in English, all claiming Du Bois, but I argue, of course, Du Bois was a historian, because he wrote his life not only chronologically, but because he had a very deep respect for documentation of heritage. And he said at the end of his last memoir that there is no deed but memory. There's no dream but deed but memory. His last words, when he finally knew he was really going to pass, he said, it's about memory. And that is history, that is telling the story.